I first heard about today's story when I saw a play in the theatre about it. Of all the stories I've covered on the channel so far, this one definitely plays out the most like an actual horror film. What's especially shocking about this one is that a corporation was prepared to flat out lie to cover up the dangers it knew to be factual. So, here we go. We've all had jobs that we've loathed throughout our working lives, whether that be a demoralising retail job, a soul-destroying customer service position, or a soul-sucking job working as a temp within an office for a guy called Mark who constantly has sweat stains and a dyed blonde comb over thinner than his intellect. None of these jobs are the most glamorous positions, but at least for the most part you can be sure you'll be safe from harm while you earn your paycheck. Health and safety can even be annoyingly excessive at times, but there are practices in place to ensure a minimum level of protection for the well-being of workers. That much could not be said for a group of female factory workers in New Jersey, Connecticut and Illinois, a group that are now referred to as the Radium Girls. Sadly, this is not the name of a kick-ass crime-fighting posse of beautiful female mutants. That would be cool though. These individuals, as is the case with many line workers, were tasked with a fairly simple but repetitive task which would be replaced by machines today. They were employed to paint watch dials and clocks with luminous paint, ensuring their vibrant hue could be conveniently seen in low-level lighting. Such work was best suited to females with small delicate fingers, some as young as 11 years old, and was in fact a highly requested position within factories, as the women could easily chat or gossip among themselves while they worked. They typically earned commission at a rate of 1 cent per dial and were incentivized to do as many as possible to earn more money. While training in new staff and in order to get the numbers on the watches small enough, new hires were taught to do something called lip pointing. After painting each number, they were taught to put the tip of the paintbrush between their lips and twirl to sharpen it. A little perk of the job for these girls was that they used the glowy cool paint on their nails, face and teeth as a cosmetic. It was a real attention getter. They had the crack with it too, painting little glowy mustaches on each other or making their ears glow. This would all be harmless fun under normal circumstances. However, the paint was made of a substance called radium. Yep, you've heard of radium poisoning. Well, they hadn't, until their jaws started literally falling off and they began losing teeth and hair and dying and stuff. The radium craze started in 1903 in Europe. Radithor was a patented and certified medicine at this time. Radium had been found to totally eradicate cancer cells, which was good because the cells were bad and radium totally knows the difference between what we want to keep and what we want to kill. It was considered a luxurious ingredient due to its added expense. A single gram was at one point valued at the equivalent of $1.9 million today. Some good news is that much like how many products are deceptively marketed today, radium would be put in the title of products, but upon closer inspection of their ingredients there wasn't actually radium in some of them. It was a buzzword to make the products sell, so getting one's hands on the real deal was very cool. It was added to toothpaste, kids' toys and costumes. Additionally, radium was like the old school fashion for Botox and fillers. All the rich people use radium in their beauty treatments. Some would have their teeth painted with radium so their smile would be brighter. It was added to cosmetics for skin that literally glowed in the dark. Okay, so you're thinking, oh man, that's terrible. Nobody knew what radium could do. What a tragic accident that we've all since learned from. No. The companies in charge of this operation were all too aware of the dangers their workforce faced. American Radium, the owners of radium, had done studies into its effects but kept the results to themselves. When the scientists within the company were handling the harmful substance, they used tongs, gloves, protective gear, face guards and a range of other tools to ensure that their exposure to radium was minimal. The girls, on the flip side, were told that radium was actually good for them. 12 numbers per watch, upwards of 200 watches per day, and with every digit the girls swallowed a little bit of radium. But they believed that by working with radium they were reaping extra health benefits, and when these women began to literally glow from the inside out, it was a positive sign. Radium poisoning itself often takes more than 2 years to show symptoms, distinguishing it from other illnesses. By the mid-1920s, dial painters were falling ill by the dozens, afflicted with horrific diseases. The radium they had swallowed was causing their bones to crumble from the inside out. Whole skeleton systems would brittle into ash. In terms of illness, initially because of the gap between exposure and symptoms, the connection was not made. A number of the women within these factories began to suffer from a variety of ailments. They reported tooth loss, lesions, ulcers, amnesia, brittle bones, necrosis where your skin falls off, and some women were made sterile by the exposure to radium. The first of the girls to officially die was Amelia Mejia, who suffered from a hemorrhage of the mouth and her jaw fell away from her skull. Another woman who went to the dentist to have her tooth pulled had her entire jaw literally break from her skull when the dentist began pulling. The women would be walking around and suddenly their legs broke underneath them, or their spines snapped in half. Despite the dramatic and horrifying effects, the company and scientists were unwilling to accept that the operations in place were killing their workers. In fact, the US Radium Company bribed coroners to list the women's cause of death as syphilis, to ruin their reputations and credibility. And it worked. The girls were shunned in public and widowed husbands were left believing their wives had been unfaithful. After several women had lost their lives to this exposure to radium, the coincidences became too much to deny. The Radium Dial Company and various others like it closed their doors in 1928, and the companies were taken to court accused of breaching labour safety regulations. 5 women, Grace Fryer, Edna Husman, Catherine Schaub, and sisters Quinta MacDonald and Albina Lariche, were the main faces behind the lawsuit and would be known as the Radium Girls. As the company dragged the suit on, their health deteriorated further, and one of the women's final words was her deathbed testimony. The turning point in the case was perhaps the death of the inventor himself, Dr. Sabin A. von Sochocki, who died in November 1928. He had failed to patent his invention, by the way, and it had been stolen by the corporation. This made him the 16th victim of this exposure to die. He would suffer from radium exposure in his hands, which had ultimately begun to crumble apart. His outcome was fatal. The Radium Company would fight the case to the bitter end, stalling justice being served by appealing decisions and taking the case as high as the Supreme Court. The women fought to change the litigation process in terms of the length of time from when they began showing symptoms to when they had first interacted with the product, and this is part of why the case was so important. They also lied to the Department of Labour by sending only one page showing healthy blood results of the Radium Girls, instead of the many others showing that their health was declining. They argued the variety of symptoms was so disparate that they couldn't all be connected. Another way that the US Radium Corp tried to run out the proverbial clock was simply trying to wait until the plaintiffs died. If they knew the plaintiffs would die if they waited long enough, then clearly they knew US Radium Corp were culpable, but still did everything they could to avoid paying up. However, at the 8th time of asking for a delay, the Radium Company were found guilty and forced to pay damages and reparations to those affected and their families. The amount paid by the company, adjusted for inflation today, would be a lump sum of $149,000, a yearly equity of $9,000, and a weekly package of just $200. Ultimately, the rate at which it was paid out was too slow to have any meaningful impact on the women's lives, and for many, what they received only covered their own funerals. Despite the verdict, the company itself never admitted fault. The women had to be buried in triple lead-lined coffins. Those who had died prior to the end of the trial had their bodies exhumed and were reburied. Years later, when this was deemed to be still not enough protection from the radiation their bodies continued to emit, the lead coffins were again dug up and placed inside of lead vaults before being reburied again. What remains of them is still radioactive to this day. It makes you wonder what other harmful products and practices might exist today in the name of profit. Until we speak again, sending you good vibes. Stay safe out there.